Hello and welcome to another one of our, I hope, again, fascinating chats. Shane Healy is my name. I'm the Director of Media and Communications here at the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne. A national living treasure sitting alongside me. It's Father Frank Brennan. Sorry to embarrass you, Frank. I do know Frank very well, and he now is the CEO of Catholic Social Services Australia. It's in that role that he's joined us today. Frank, welcome.
Thanks, Shane. Good to be back. And of course, we knew each other when we were on the board of Jesuit Social Services together.
Correct.
Here in Melbourne many years ago.
And look, it's lovely you've given up some time. What are you actually doing here in Melbourne now that you're in this new role?
Well, being the CEO now of Catholic Social Services Australia, I've just been speaking today at the annual meeting of Catholic Social Services Victoria, and I've been meeting with some of the wonderful people who work in the church here in welfare organisations. I had a delightful couple of hours yesterday morning with Robin Miller from McKillop Family Services, and caught up with people like Brian Lawrence, who knows a lot about Catholic social teaching and the minimum wage for people. Father Joe Caddy, the Episcopal Vicar, who has, of course, a lifetime of experience in welfare and prison ministry.
Does some wonderful work.
Absolutely, yes. And I've just come from St Kilda, seeing Kathy Humphreys there and her team at Sacred Heart Mission, where they do just fabulous work, and it really is the Sacred Heart in action.
So, to take on this role, tell us why you've taken it on, and I guess what your vision is now while you're in the role.
Well, I've been a Jesuit priest for 31 years. I've been in the Jesuits, I think, for about 42 years. I've done a lot of work in terms of social justice, but more in terms of human rights and the rights of Aboriginal people, refugees. I suppose I was becoming worried, Shane, that I thought the gap between rich and poor in Australia was getting wider.
Interesting.
And I had a worry that in Australian politics at the moment, that the trust in major institutions, including major political parties, was collapsing.
Definitely.
And a bit of a sense that people were really starting to say, oh, well, social policy doesn't matter too much. As long as we're growing the economic pie, everything will be well. And it's almost as if the deserving poor will get a bit of the action. But
and that is quite a common mantra.
It is. And those who get labelled as the undeserving poor will drop off the edge. Well, that's contrary to everything we believe about human dignity. So I thought to be able to do something about that would be a good thing. The other thing was, and it's not just because I'm a Jesuit, but I am a great fan of the present Pope, Pope Francis. And I think he's shown us a lot about mercy and justice, particularly for the poor. And I had a worry that I thought the Australian Church was failing to deliver enough traction on what I might call the Francis effect.
Okay, yeah.
And I think another thing for me was thinking that, well, I could continue to be a professor of law at the Catholic University, which I enjoy. But I thought with things going on with the Royal Commission, and now with talk about a synod of the Australian Church in about 2020, that to be able to be a little more involved with the institutional church structures would be good. Now, I've had a lot of experience over the years in the health sector, because I spent about 7 years on the board of St Vincent's Health Australia, the largest Catholic health provider in the country.
Yes.
And I've had a lot to do with the education sector over the years. Most Catholic principals have probably heard from me more than enough. So I thought, well, to be able to do something in the welfare sector would be a good thing to do.
Well, I think there'll be a lot of people smiling at having heard that answer, and you've covered a lot of ground there. So let's dig into a couple of those more specifically. Firstly, what do you think you can realistically achieve in, say, a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year period as CEO around that gap between rich and poor, and I guess almost that education of politicians to start looking at things hopefully differently?
Well, my provincial and I, we've decided that I would be available for a 5-year term if the bishops and others would like me for that length of time. So I'm taking a pretty long view approach.
Sure.
I'm thinking that particularly in the first 6 months or so, a lot of getting around the country, just listening, hearing ideas percolating up as what are the key priorities of those church people who are on the ground working with people who are poor and disadvantaged.
Yeah.
And how would they like to see national policy, How would they like to see funding arrangements? How would they like to see things in place which can better serve the interests of the people to whom they're committed? So over the 5-year period, I would hope, once I had a sense of all of that, because I'm not jumping into anything.
No, sure.
And you won't hear anything from me until at least the time of the federal budget.
Yep.
Because I've got to be able to sit down with the experts and also consult ecumenically with groups like Anglicare, Uniting Care, groups like the Australian Council for Social Service.
Oh, yes. Yep.
But also getting around and meeting some of the politicians and some of the senior public servants. So my hope would be over the 5-year period that, as I say, I readily accept that governments of whatever political persuasion, they have a job in what they call budget repair. But over 5 years, I'd want to apply a pretty simple template to that. I'd say, well, in terms of budget repair, is what's being proposed equitable? I mean, is it the fair go, as we know in Australia?
And I assume right now you don't think it is?
I don't think it is, no. Second would be, is it sustainable? And not only is it sustainable as policy in the longer term, but is it sustainable also in terms of care of the environment, for example? And third, and I think most important for us in Catholic social services, is whatever is being proposed, does it respect the dignity of the poor and disadvantaged? So if we could get that sort of template being applied to whoever's in office at the time, then I think that would be a good thing.
And I think people would look and say, you've achieved plenty if you could get to that point.
Yes, I think the other thing would be trying to help put a spring in the step of those who have got a passion for social justice, particularly for the poorest and most disadvantaged. And I think the way Pope Francis has been doing that is by giving us a bit of a rejig, moving a little from just the idea of justice to the idea of mercy. And I think in his ideas of mercy and compassion, we see that what's absolutely essential are those down-to-earth human relationships with people who are doing it tough.
And so you talked earlier about the Pope Francis effect. Do you feel it's, if you like, the obligation of our church leaders to be picking up the ball and running with it a bit more? Or do you think that really digs down deeper into your world and then the worlds of these other organisations who come under your umbrella?
Well, I think it's the obligation of everyone, in that I think that the Francis effect is not just talking, it's about relationships and doing. I saw it in January last year. The then Australian ambassador over there in Rome, John McCarthy, said to me, would you like to meet the Pope? I said, well, I wouldn't mind meeting this one. I'd never met a previous Pope, and though a Jesuit shouldn't say this, I wasn't all that fussed about meeting the Pope previously, but I said, well, I wouldn't mind meeting this guy. Well, I was taken along to a papal audience, and it went along, he gave his talk, and to be honest, I found it a bit boring. And then I thought, oh, well, it's all over. But then he came down the steps and he spent the next 3/4 of an hour greeting everyone in the front section.
Gee.
Now, guess what? Everyone in the front section were not bishops in purple or priests in clerical collars or whatever. They were kids in wheelchairs and their carers and people dying of cancer.
Isn't that wonderful?
And he spent 45 minutes embracing every one of those people, talking with them, kids jumping up all over him, whatever. And it was there that I realised that this bloke's fair dinkum, that the gospel just exudes out of him. So it's about bringing head, hearts and hands together. And if we can do more of that, we can't just leave it to the bishops. We've got to all do it because we're all the people of God.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. Did you actually end up getting to meet him yourself?
I did, and you'll be pleased to know that I had with me a bottle of Inigo Jesuit 7 Hill wine.
I have tasted that.
Now, I don't have a lot of European languages, but I did say to him, Vino Jesuita Australiano. And he looked at me with a great laugh and he said, Aqua Sacra, holy water. And everyone around was delighted.
Great story. I'm talking to the great Father Frank Brennan, who has taken over as CEO of Catholic Social Services Australia. And we're covering quite a lot in our 10 or 12 minutes. But can I maybe turn left a little and just...
Oh, I've never liked going left.
and we just have a little recap on the Royal Commission. You've been outspoken. You've, I think, made some marvellous commentary on it, to be honest. What is your general view? Because the way I see it, the next 2 or 3 years and beyond that are really probably more critical than what's gone on in this rather harrowing 4 years up to here. What's your thoughts?
Sure. Well, as you say, I've had a few things to say over the years about the Royal Commission. Part of my background in these things is that I was very involved in Aboriginal advocacy at the time of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. Yes. And that commission also ran for a long time. It made over 300 recommendations, and here we are 25 years on. Now, the rate of deaths within prisons has reduced because of the recommendations being implemented, but the really big recommendations about social change have not been implemented.
In the communities? Yes.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Because in fact, the rate of imprisonment of Indigenous Australians is now higher than it was at the time of that Royal Commission.
I read that recently.
So,
it's a shocking stat.
I am one who's very aware that no matter what the media focus on a long-running Royal Commission, once it reports, as we lawyers say, it's functus officio, doesn't any longer exist. And one of the problems with a Royal Commission of this sort is that it's a federal Royal Commission of both the federal and state governments.
Yes.
And so any recommendations have to be taken up and implemented by all levels of government.
Levels, yeah.
So that's why I've been very insistent that whatever the Commission's doing, make sure you're very focused on getting those recommendations delivered, and don't trespass too far into matters that you don't have the competence to deal with. And I must say I have been pleased to see in recent weeks that the Commission itself has been asking, like some of the bishops, well, I mean, we can be looking at causes of what went on in the past, but we know there are some things we as a Commission of the state cannot do.
Yes.
There are some things only you, the Church, can do.
Yes.
Now, I think what's absolutely critical, and Catholics have to accept this, the Royal Commission and governments have a clear job to do in setting basic standards and protocols for care and protection of children. But how that's done within an institution like a church, consistent with its theology and all the rest, is for that church to work out. But what we can't get away from is, at the end of the day, we have to deliver on those protections. And I think the other thing is that one of the good things, strangely to come from the Royal Commission, I think is an increased sense that there were need for change in our church and its culture. And with talk of a plenary assembly or a synod or whatever in 2020, I think one of the effects of the Royal Commission is to create an awareness among Catholics generally, and dare I say the bishops, that the agenda for a 2020 plenary assembly has to be far more radical and substantive than what might have previously been envisaged.
And I think we're all sensing that.
Oh, yes.
Without any doubt. I suppose, coming in from the outside, as a layperson, I think your summary of that need and feel for something a little bit beyond just the norm, it's very strong.
It is.
And to look at the Royal Commission, apart from the shocking array of stats that were divvied out on the first day that I think just horrified us all, I felt over the 2.5 weeks, or a bit beyond that, that there was a lot of great discussion, a lot of very intelligent discussion, and I got the feeling we were moving a little forward in terms of both sides.
Yes, and I think part of that was the welcome development of seeing that there could be transparent, open discussion and even difference of opinion about matters.
Yes.
And admission even by the most senior bishops in the country that we don't pretend to have all the answers. And if I might say, I think one of the great challenges out of all of this is particularly to competent Catholic laity, that you can't just be leaving it to the clerics in terms of these things.
Yes.
And we've got to work much more cooperatively together, drawing upon the competencies of the church community, who are, as Vatican II said, we're all the people of God. So we've all got to own this together and design something which is far more transparent, far more coherent, and something which is far more accountable.
One last question, a little bit out of left field, but it's probably very relevant as you're beginning your new role. And that is, there are a lot of organisations in the whole social services sphere, not just in the Catholic sphere. Do you get a sense that as you go in your 5 years that it may come and rise to the top that too many of these are doing too much duplication, or don't you see that as anything of a problem?
I see it as an enormous problem, but I also see it as a good challenge. Mm-hmm. And that's why I say that when it comes to questions of national advocacy mm-hmm. on welfare reform, what you need is, for example, a group like Catholic Social Services Victoria, Catholic Social Services Australia, to be cooperating very closely. And to give just one very simple example, just come from Sacred Heart Mission yes. down there at St Kilda with Kathy Humphreys, as I say. Well, Catholic Social Services Australia, we're putting a presentation to the Bishops' Conference in May about issues to do with homelessness. Now, front and centre at our presentation will be Kathy. Why? She knows much more about it than I'll ever know. She's very, very passionate, very, very experienced. If you want the competent, compassionate voice and face of the Church on homelessness, there she is. Yes. And there she will be with a group of us appearing before the bishops to saying, we really can take this forward and we can be bolder and more visionary than we have been in the past. And that's got to be what it's about.
And as you spoke to the different organisations in this last couple of days, was the decision of the state government around the Sunday wages right to the fore in their mind?
Right to the fore in terms of how do we get wage justice for everybody. Yes. But many of them, like me, not being economists, not pretending to have the complete answer to that. Yeah. And another thing, which has also been raised, is that one of the huge challenges in the welfare sector is, of course, the increasing casualisation of the workforce.
Yes, good point.
So ensuring that it's one thing for us to be saying, let's have justice for these people. It's another to ensure that we are doing justice and that we've got the structures right ourselves in terms of our employment practices.
Well, what a terrific chat. And I think we're in pretty good hands with Father Frank Brennan, who's taken over as the CEO of Catholic Social Services Australia. Thanks for your time, Frank, and good luck in the role. I don't think you'll need a lot of luck, by the way. And of course, as we always say at the end of these chats on our Melbourne Catholic website, the magazine's always available in the churches, first weekend of every month. And I'm hoping in the next few months there'll be a very, very detailed chat to the great man here alongside me. Thanks again, Frank.
Thank you. Good to be with you. And have a great Lent.